clarification elements about what could be brought up, but really in general it's questions, comments that are related to the zoning code requirements that are allowed to be brought up during the public comment period. So with that, that's a summary of the changes before you, and I'll invite Chair Willis if he wants to add anything to that.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lee.
Thank
you. Mr. Willis was gracious enough to allow us to discuss this. At our last meeting, we asked him to go back and further discuss it with the IPC. They have done so. We greatly appreciate that, and it's coming back before us today, hopefully in a final presentation. So, Commissioners, do y'all have any questions? And is there anything that you would like to add today to that?
Well, the only thing I would like to add is that our last meeting, when we discussed this as the commission, we then opened it up to the public. And some of the same folks who usually come to our meetings were there. Nobody got up to make any comment about this at all. So it kind of surprised us. We thought that they would, you know, make some constructive comments, but nobody spoke. So we felt like then that we came up with a good statement, and would hope that y'all would approve this at your next meeting. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to come up a little earlier.
Yes,
my
sir.
grandson will appreciate it, and so will my wife.
Not many things more important than our grandkids.
Right.
So we certainly understand. Commissioners, any comment?
Mr. Chairman, are we going to vote on this today? Or
This is a voting item for today.
This is a voting item, and if it is, I move we approve the revised public comment policy for the IPC.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If none, all in favor, please raise your right hand. That is unanimous. Thank you, and that is done. Thank you, sir.
Thank
you. I might add at this point, Commissioner Fendig will be here. He's running a little bit late, but he did send a text saying he was on the way. So we'll now move to the budget discussion for fiscal year 22. Ms. Munson, if you would come forward.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is going to be a brief overview of our fiscal year 22 budget, and this PowerPoint presentation is meant to be used in conjunction with the budget book that was released last Thursday. A little bit about our revenues. This is a breakdown of our revenues. 73% of our revenue comes from taxes, and everything else is split between those other sources there. With taxes being the majority of our revenue, I'll focus on that in today's presentation. So with our taxes, 55% is property taxes, and these are the taxes that are based on the millage rates that are set each year. 43% is sales tax, and that is made up of accommodation excise tax, vehicle tabat, local option sales tax, real estate transfers, intangible taxes, alcohol beverage, insurance premium, all of those taxes that are related to when a sale happens that is not based on the millage rate. And then 2% is business taxes, which is insurance premium and occupation tax. So this year we were tasked with balancing the budget and finding a way to cut the millage rate, and we did that by finding efficiencies throughout the county. We kept new positions to a minimum, and we also wanted to take care of our current employees because over the last year we have not had any increases for employees other than the one-time COLA that happened that did not increase salaries. So for the general fund, we're proposing a 0.41 mil decrease, which covers all tax districts in the county, so tax districts 1 through 6. So that nets out to $2.1 million in revenue that we would have additional 2.1 revenue if we did not lower the millage rate in the general fund. In the police fund, we are asking to increase the millage rate by 0.16 mils, which is an additional $720,000. The police fund, as you know, is a new fund that was just started last year. And we've been struggling to have enough millage in that fund to pay for all of the police expenses. So We're asking to raise that millage rate. So the net decrease for all districts across the board is 0.25. Districts 1 and 6, which is the city and Jekyll Island, they do not pay for police services. So they, through the county millage, they don't pay for police services through the county millage rate. So they are going to see a 0.41 mil decrease in their property taxes. So the net decrease in property taxes across the board by doing this millage rate cut is 1.39 million to the county. So, you know, we have lots of capital projects and lots of things that need to be done, but we and the Board of Commissioners felt like this is a show of good faith to the citizens who have been hit hard with COVID this year. Although it's not a huge decrease, it's something, and we could definitely use those funds to do capital projects, but we felt like the citizens could use them as well. So that is the direction we went this year. The way that we were able to do this decrease was we had an increase in the tax digest of 6.4% in growth and inflation. So this is from new builds and add-ons to existing properties that, of course, the homes that are covered under the exemption, the Scarlett Williams exemption, they're going to actually have a decrease, even if the value of their home went up, because their millage rate is going down. We had strong collections by the tax commissioner over the last couple of years, coming in $1 million or $2 million over budget. And we've had some really conservative budgets in the last few years that has enabled us to save up some money in our general fund balance. So that's how we were able to lower the millage rate this year. This is a chart of the proposed millage rates by district. You can see here is our current millage rate for each district. FY22 is our proposed. So these are the changes, and this is the percent change in each district. And then this is just a breakdown of what makes up those millage rates. So I put this in here if you guys have questions and want to use it in the future for reference. That's the breakdown. So the M&O is what we call our general fund millage rate, and this is the one that had the 0.41 drop in millage. As far as expenditures go in this budget, personnel costs make up a big chunk of our budget. 56% of our total budget is made up of personnel costs, and I just want to clarify that my percentages take out the interfund duplications. And I know that's really complicated and it's hard to explain, but each fund of the county is like its own set of books. So we have basically 23 different sets of books. So if we're going to use money from the police fund, let's say we're going to use money from the general fund to go into the police fund, we have to show it as an expenditure in the general fund, a revenue in the police fund, and then when the police fund spends it, we show it as an expenditure in the police fund. So it duplicates the expenditures. It looks like we're spending it twice, but we're not. We're just really transferring it over. But because of those transfers between funds and the way that we have to do it, we have what's called interfund duplications of revenues and expenditures. So in the true budget, we have to show the budget with all of those transfers in and out. It totals around $18 to $20 million a year. So when you look at our total budget at the bottom, and it says that our budget for the year is $140 million, it's really, truly about $120 million. But that $20 million in interfund transfers has to be budgeted. So for my presentation today, I have removed those interfund transfers to try to give you a better picture of what we're actually doing. Thank you very much. Pollen is killing me. So 56% of our budget is personnel, which is $66.8 million, and this is across all funds. And you can see the largest chunk is public safety at 58%, and then the rest of it is split here among the other functional types. So we see that in this year's proposed budget, a 5.6% increase, or $3.5 million between last year and this year in the personnel budget. That increase is made up primarily in these areas, and I've listed them out here. 63% of that increase is an increase in public safety, 15% in judiciary, 12% general government, and 10% culture and recreation. So what that increase is made up of is a 2% COLA for all employees, a 3% possible merit. So merit is based on performance. So an employee can earn up to 3% if they receive a perfect performance review. We have also put career track and reclassifications back into this budget. They were not in the budget last year. We have a net of 2.15 new positions. So we deleted some positions and we added some positions, but the net change is an additional 2.15 new positions. The vast majority of our new positions are in the judiciary area. And then we also had a $1 million increase in our healthcare costs this year. As you know, we are self-insured, so this is just an estimate. If that comes in lower, obviously we won't spend that money, but we have budgeted for the estimate. I've been told that some of you prefer the real numbers over charts and graphs, so I've added that to the bottom of each page if you want to go back and crunch the numbers. But this tells you where I got all my numbers from. Capital costs, it's a breakdown of our capital cost spending. So $5.85 million in capital, 5% of our total budget with the interfund duplications removed, a $1.4 million increase over last year. And then that increase is primarily in public safety capital and recreation capital. And Public Works capital had a significant decrease of 39% due to some projects that were ongoing last year that they finished up. So that is a breakdown of where we spend our capital money for fiscal year 22. And again, here's the numbers for those of you that would like to look at those. Capital costs, this is what we're spending our money on capital. So I've sorted this here, largest to smallest. So most of our 5.82 million of it is going to vehicles, and the vast majority of that is public safety vehicles. And then we go on down the list with some new software, machinery, etc. Operating costs, this is a breakdown of our operating costs. Our total operating budget is $41 million, which is 36% of the total budget once you remove the interfund duplications. We have a $5 million increase between fiscal year 21 and 22, and that increase is made up primarily of $1.8 million in public safety, $1.1 million in housing and development, which is an increase to the CVB and the EDA, and the general fund of $939,000. I'm sorry, general government, which is mostly our IT costs. As we go to more of this cloud software, we don't have to pay as much up front for those softwares, but we have to pay for those annual costs every year for the support. I wanted to make a comment on the CVB and the EDA. The $937,000 additional to the CVB, the way this is done is it's done off a projection. We have an agreement with the CVB that we'll give them 50% of whatever our hotel motel costs that come in. And the CVB provides us the estimates of the amount of revenue that we're going to get for that year. So that's where this number comes from. So the estimates were up to 7.9, 7.5? 7.6 million for this year, which is up significantly. I believe last year we were only at 5.7 or somewhere around there with the pandemic. So they're estimating we're going to be much higher than we have been in the past. So they are not specifically asking for an increase in their funding. It's just the way that the agreement works out that they get 50%. Now, if we bring in less than that, they're not going to get what's in the budget. They're going to actually get 50% based on the current agreement that we have. So that pretty much covers our operating cost increases. Here's the breakdown again. And that is really all I have for today. So I'm available to answer any questions that you all have on the proposed budget for FY22.
Commissioners, any question or comment?
Tamara, comment of absolutely no consequence. On page 8, under the general fund trend, I think that should be FY 2022 and not 2021.
I think that's in the one I sent for last Thursday night. I was looking at,
Yeah,
it's
it was
not in this
The
one.
80 million should be FY 22, I think, and not 21. You've got 21 at 74,649,000, which is last year, but this year's 80 million.
I think that might be in the budget book. Just, do you have your budget
It is.
book? Can you look on page 8?
It is in the budget book, and it's on the slide here. It just needs to be changed to 22 instead of 21. This thing's confusing enough.
It's 22, right? Okay. All right, I'll take a look at it.
You think you've already made that correction, is what you're saying?
Okay, all right. I
She
didn't have it.
she sees where it was.
Okay. Yeah, and I think there's an updated version.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Ms. Munson, I just want to give a personal thank you for all the work that you've done on this budget. You've answered endless questions and met with us all individually and small group wise. A lot of work's gone into this. The only thing I can say out of it is I am very much impressed with how good you are at your job.
Thank
So,
you.
Thank you so much for this. Gentlemen, this is not a voting item today. It's for discussion if anyone has questions.
I had a couple of questions,
Okay.
kind of general. When you say that a fund is balanced, what do you mean by that?
So a fund is balanced when the revenue and expenditures equal each other. So sometimes we have to use fund balance or savings to make that revenue equal. So if you look in the back of your budget book, there's a list of every fund, and it'll tell you when a fund is balanced. If it just says balanced, it means that our revenue and expenditure budgets match. But if it says balanced with the use of fund balance, then we had to pull money out of savings to make that revenue and expense match. We are required to have a balanced budget, so we cannot have more, in our budget, we cannot have more expenditures than we have revenues. We are allowed to have more revenues than expenses.
So if it's balanced, the money in there is available to be spent?
So the money that is in the budget is available to be spent. So not every fund, but a lot of our funds have a fund balance. You won't see that in that budget book, but I can provide you a breakdown of those funds. It's also in the CAFR that we went over Thursday night. So the fund balance is basically the savings account for that fund. So we like each fund to have a savings account in case something comes up that they need to cover, emergency type things. So,
Yeah,
yes.
that's what I wanted you to get to, that it's like a savings.
Right, the fund balance is a savings.
Okay.
And unless it specifically says in there that we're using fund balance, we're not. We would be just using the projected revenues and expenditures from next fiscal year.
Okay. On the Brunswick Circuit Fund, Judicial Circuit Fund, what is that exactly?
So that is made up of our Superior Court judges. I believe that there are 5 of them. I know we service 5 counties, and I may have to call on Aaron to help me a little bit on this, but each county pays into that circuit fund, and it helps to cover the cost of those judges and their operating expenses. And then in addition to the circuit fund, there's also judges that are assigned to each county that the county picks up more of the cost for, that is outside the circuit, that's in the general fund. But that circuit money is designated only for those purposes, and it cannot be transferred or used elsewhere. It's only for that court circuit.
Okay. And under the Drug Abuse and Education Fund,
So that,
Yeah,
that's a fund that whenever someone goes to court and they get a ticket for drunk driving or whatever, they have to pay a fee based on a ordinance that we have, I believe, or it might be a state ordinance. They have to pay a fee into that fund, and that fund goes to help people with rehab type things and education and drug testing and stuff like that. So it's kind of a supplement to our drug court fund, but it's meant to give out scholarships for people that are going through specific treatments, and then they're required to pay those scholarships back if they relapse. And I don't know all the details about exactly how that works, but I know that that fund specifically is made with the fees that are paid in court, and it's designated with that fee for that drug abuse and treatment.
you may not know this, but who handles the education part to that?
That whole fund is handled by Judge Kelly, and so he's over that and the drug court fund.
Okay.
And I believe that any of the education part of it it's all outsourced. So that fund really just provides the scholarships. It doesn't do any actual education in-house.
Okay. The jail commissary fund, do you know if they use it for medical costs?
This year, the sheriff has agreed to pay some of the medical costs out of the jail commissary fund. So he gave $200,000 from the jail commissary and $200,000 from the jail complex fund, both to cover inmate prescriptions this year. So that would have been something that needed to be funded in the general fund. And he has done that for the last 2 years. He has contributed money from the jail commissary fund to cover some inmate prescriptions.
Have we looked at, again, I'm bringing this up for the 100th time, the federal funded healthcare clinic? It seems like all of the inmates would qualify for services from there, and they're usually free. So have we looked at a partnership or something with them?
I have not personally, and I can check with the sheriff to see if he's looked into that, but I have not.
Okay, yeah, I think that's something we need to, again, look at, because we're paying for it as taxpayers from the federal government, and they have a primary care doctor, they have eye care, they have a dentist, and they give out meds. And at least the people we have incarcerated should qualify for that. And we shouldn't, pay for that if we don't have to, I believe. With there's a small amount under the Juvenile Services Fund. Who decides on the use of those funds?
That's the juvenile court judge.
Okay.
I believe that fund also is for some type of a scholarship type situation.
Okay. Under the trust, the pension trust fund. What? Yeah, I see this under the status. It says 5 million and something, but I know the fund is a lot bigger than that. So what's
So that's what our estimate for revenues and expenditures will be for this year. So we estimate that we'll pay out about 5 million in benefits, and that we'll earn enough to cover those benefits. At the end of the year, we always have to adjust that budget because we don't know what the market's going to do, and we don't try to figure it out. We just set the same budget every year, and when it comes in, we adjust the budget at the end of the year to show what we truly did in that fund.
Okay. On attachment A, First page says miscellaneous. What's in miscellaneous?
Matthew, can you pull up the budget book for me, please? I'm sorry. It's going to be attachment A, and, are you looking in the general fund?
Yeah, the very first page.
Okay. All right, so miscellaneous is basically what doesn't fit in any of those other categories. It gets dumped into miscellaneous. So there are some, I honestly cannot remember. I can look it up and give you that information, but if it doesn't fit in one of these other buckets, we put it in miscellaneous. So if it's not a tax or a license and permit, et cetera.
Okay, yeah, if you would provide that, that would be helpful. The county manager's contingency, I mean, over the years, I've heard it be used, so that's just an arbitrary amount. How do we arrive at this figure?
So in the past, we've had around 500,000 in there. We typically never use even close to that, but it's been a little cushion for us in case something happens during the year. Then the last couple of years, it's been cut. It was cut to 400 and then cut to 300 last year to help balance the budget. So I was not sure what would happen with a new county manager coming in and what kind of things would be in the works, and so I just put that back to 400,000. It's an arbitrary amount. Typically, we spend between 200 and 300 a year on different projects that, you know, something might be budgeted that runs over by $5,000. That can come out of contingency. And then also at the end of the year, if a department is over budget by $1,000 or $2,000, we'll use contingency to bring that budget into compliance with state law.
Yeah, is the commissioner's training, does it come out of that?
Commissioner's training does not. It comes out of the this budget right here that says county commission. It's
Oh, okay.
449, I think. That's where the commissioner's training is.
Okay. I just had a side question about the IT budget and GIS, the cybersecurity. I know we've had a lot of allocations from last year, if I remember correctly, being on the finance committee. But cybersecurity is a major piece. Are we, and you may not know this, I guess we need, is it Deborah?
Yeah, Deborah would be best to speak about that. I know that we are continuing. If you remember, I talked about how our IT costs had gone up 500,000. Part of that is increased in cybersecurity costs and things like that that are coming up in the next year. And is Deborah here? No. Yes, if you want to talk on that. But I do know that one of the things that I've heard over the years is that you can never really be fully prepared for something like that. So we do the best that we can within the budget that we have. But if we had a $100 million budget, it still wouldn't guarantee that we would have 100% security. So I think that, our IT department definitely does a good job. And
I just wanted to make sure, I mean, with this pipeline issue that we just had and discussion about what happened to Atlanta being held hostage, those kind of things, to make sure that we're going after what we need to try to do the best. I mean, I know it's difficult with these foreign countries allowing hackers to do what they want to do.
Commissioner, Deborah Bragdon, IT Director. But yes, sir, we are probably about 20% of our budget is on cybersecurity. We pay maintenance on cybersecurity software like endpoint security. We do the training, the know befores in there. So yes, sir, security is really important. Years ago, maybe not so much, but that is one of our top priorities, is make sure data is secure, make sure our network is protected.
Okay.
So it is definitely in the budget.
All right.
Deborah, can I ask a question regarding that?
Yes, sir.
We have a server, our server's correct, for the county. Are we backing up and without telling something, but I mean, we're making sure we have a second off-site secure backup of information somewhere, is that correct?
Yes, sir. We actually do back up and take our information off-site.
Deborah, I had a question too. I'm fascinated by this ransom deal. You know, do we have a policy that would deal with that? I mean, how would we handle that if somebody said, hey, Deborah, for $50,000, I'll get you back up and running again?
Probably ask them.
Yes, so we're working on developing an incident response plan. David and I were in training last week on that. And so, yeah, we have discussed policies and everything. So, yeah, we hope to have a plan like, you know, if something happened, who we would contact and what we would do.
Ultimately, we have to decide.
We hope we
I'd hate
would
to
not
make
pay
that
them. We
call.
hope that wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just wonder if you paid them, then they said, well, you know, we decided it's 100 now. So,
Yeah, they
I
I
could
mean,
come
that's
back.
just amazing.
Yeah.
So anyway, I didn't get anything to do with the budget. I just wondered if we had a policy and knew what we'd do if we, you know, if we were propositioned by somebody that, you know, shut us down. So anyway.
It's possible, you're correct.
The indirect cost allocation. I saw it in two different places at a different amount. So, and I know, could you explain what it is? I know what it is, but if you could explain for the public what it is and why there's a.
So the line in the revenue budget that's called indirect cost allocation, this is all monies that we collect from other funds that transfer into the general fund to cover our indirect costs. This also includes our employee health care costs, our property and liability costs, workers' comp. So for ease of management purposes, every time we pay a bill for property and liability, or we pay weekly health care bills, workers' comp, we don't go and divide that invoice up by every single department and how many employees they have. We charge it all to a department in the general fund, and then we spread that cost out to all departments based on how many employees they have. So that indirect cost, that is a transfer from all the departments across the county into the general fund to cover their share of those costs. So indirect costs are made up of the finance department, HR, and IT, because we don't do any type of true service to outside citizens. All of our service primarily is for internal purposes. So there are a few things that are excluded from those budgets, but those budgets are spread between all of the departments across the county, and then also the healthcare, workers' comp, and property and liability. So the different amounts, you would see a revenue line in the general fund, and then you would see expenditure lines throughout every other fund. And if you add all that up, they should equal.
Okay.
And they do, because I've checked it about 15 times.
I'm sure you're right, Mayor. On the police and the sheriff seizure funds, they decide what to use those funds for?
Well, it's regulated by law on what they can use those funds for. So yes, they do decide what to use it, but primarily it has to be equipment type items like vehicles or some type of equipment that they can buy to assist in drug seizures going forward.
I think that's all I have. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioners, anything else? Then again, to your staff, all that's had a hand in this, thank you.
I just want to let the public know that on June 3rd at the commission meeting, we'll have a public hearing on the budget where any citizen that wants to come speak on the proposed budget can do so. And then the adoption of the fiscal year 22 budget is scheduled for the June 17th meeting.
June 3rd and then June 17th. All right. Thank you.
Mayor, I had one other. You mentioned about inflationary economy. Is that a prediction, or where are we coming from with that language?
I mean, I know we all are seeing the gas prices skyrocketing already. You know, plywood has gone from $8 a sheet to $48 a sheet, and all costs are going up significantly already. So we expect that to continue over the next year. And we've tried very hard to cut back as much as possible while still cover. You know, we've gotten projections from our vendors that concrete costs are going to go up 15 to 20% this fiscal year. So we reach out to our vendors. We ask those types of questions. What kind of cost increases do you expect to see? And all of our vendors are saying we're expecting to see significant price increases over the next year. So, you know, as we move through these projects, we'll bid them out. And if the bids come in higher than the budget, then we can reject those bids and say we're either not going to do the project or we're going to find additional funding to finish that project. And then as far as our regular goods and services, we watch the departmental budgets on a monthly basis. And as budgets are coming in, I look at the percentage of the year that we're through and how much of their budget they've spent. So when they get, you know, to a point where, let's say we're only 30% through the year, but they've spent 60% of their budget, if there's not a good reason for that, then, you know, we would be having conversations already. But that is monitored by finance, and the department heads also monitor their budgets on a monthly basis.
Thank you.
All right. I think at this time we're ready to move to our next item. Discuss the possible county initiation of revisions to the Yacht Club Tract Plan Development District ZM 2376 related to the 25-foot marsh buffer requirement. And Ms. Leaf, you are up.
Great, thank you. So as some of you may know, the Yacht Club Plan Development on St. Simons Island has a 25-foot marsh buffer setback that is built into the plan development text. So it's a little bit unusual to have that in a PD. We haven't seen that in too many others. And as you may know, any development that occurs on the marsh, there is a state-mandated Coastal Marshland Protection Act boundary and a buffer. And the buffer is typically 25 feet from that CMPA boundary, you know, into a property. The Yacht Club PD, you know, mirrored that at 25 feet. But what has occurred in a lot of the properties in Yacht Club is that they qualify for an exemption from this 25-foot state-required buffer. Basically, if more than 18% of your property is rendered undevelopable because of the buffer, and if your lot was platted prior to a specific year, then you may be exempt from that buffer and not have a buffer requirement on your property. So a lot of the lots in Yacht Club do not have a state-required buffer. And however, the plan development text still has a 25-foot buffer in there that has to be followed because it's a zoning code requirement in their PD. So we've, over the last for many years, this PD has been in place since 2007. It was revised in 2012. For many years, it was kind of inconsistently applied. The last couple of years, we looked at the code and have been strictly following it, which states that the 25-foot buffer, any improvements within that, need site plan approval in front of the Islands Planning Commission. So we've been taking pools, patios, anything that comes within that area to the IPC for approval. The ones that have come before them have all been approved. The IPC, may have some different questions, asking for some different elements to be shown on the site plan, but they have all been approved. So some commissioners, as well as property owners and Yacht Club, have, asked us the question of, why is this PD more restrictive? Could this possibly be looked at being changed? So that's really, kind of in summary why this is coming before you, is that it has been a request to look at this change. So what the county does have for other properties that don't have a PD restriction like this, the county does have a 15-foot marsh setback in our zoning code. So that would be the minimum setback that any property on the marsh would have to build to. And so that's, what we wanted to do is ask you this question of whether, you feel that the county would be interested in looking at initiating a change to this PD. And if that's the case, would the 15-foot setback that we have in the zoning code, be appropriate for this area, and that would be what future lots would develop to. We did include a map in your staff report packet that shows the lots that are built out in Yacht Club and how many remain. So the vacant lots that are not currently that have not had site plan, are not under under development, under availability permit. So there's approximately 7 lots that remain that are vacant in Yacht Club. So just to kind of give you a sense of how many properties still need to be developed in that neighborhood. So with that, that's kind of the crux of what we're looking at and wanted to discuss with you today. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Ms. Leaf, what's on that map that you provided? We've got black hashtags and hash marks and red hash marks. What does that denote?
Sure. So and I'm sorry, the one that I printed out is not in color. But the hashtag is either site plan approved or under construction.
Okay.
I think we're going to try to bring that up so we can see it on the screen.
Yeah, if I'd have read it, I would have seen that. I was just looking at the pictures.
Right.
So.
Yeah, the ones that are yellow, that are completely filled in as solid, those are the vacant lots.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay. Does that,
Questions?
Can you read that? Is the red the site plan? Okay. Okay, so the red hash marks as site plan has been approved for the property. They may or may not, they may not have gotten a building permit yet. But then the ones that are the black hash marks are under construction under a building permit.
Stephanie, just so I understand this thing now, not particularly to the Yacht Club, but for the rest of the county, we have a 15-foot setback, but the 18% has got to be applicable. Is that correct?
Right, so even if they do not have a DNR setback, the county still requires a 15-foot setback.
Yeah, okay. So if they don't have, so the DNR would not require any setback if it was, if the 18% rule went into effect. But the county's got 15, so the 25 is not applicable. Okay.
Correct.
All right, I understand.
And as it pertains to where the DNR setback does apply, then we go to the DNR setback.
That is correct.
That's
Yes.
what we're considering.
Stephanie, I know one of these was brought for the zoning appeals board, and I've sat in on planning commission meetings where I know of at least 3 more. So what we're after, are we taking people having to come to the planning commission and ask for forgiveness, or?
We've had a little bit of both. A lot of them we've been able to catch in time, whereas before they actually put their pool or patio in. A couple times though, they have, there's a corner of their patio or they started construction, and we've had to do a stop work until they go through the site plan process. So it does cause a delay to their development to go through that process.
Well, Stephanie, why would these be necessary to go back to the planning commission? I mean, if they apply the 18% applies, it seems like the 15 feet ought to be automatic. I mean, and to go back to I don't understand why they would have to go back to the planning commission for site plan approval.
Sure. Yeah, it's just because the plan development text specifically says
Oh,
within
okay.
the 25 feet. Yeah, I'm sorry, I may not have
No,
stated
no,
that clearly.
I just got
Yeah,
it.
no, I
okay.
think I didn't
This is
clear-
the
clearly
PD
say
text
that.
is the culprit here. Okay.
Yes, yeah, the PD, exactly. So the PD text has a 25 feet, and then it says any improvements within that 25 feet need site plan approval
I got
before the IPC.
So with the PD text originally was written for a reason, apparently. And do we normally go back and amend PD texts such as what's being proposed here? I can't recollect one, but I'm not saying it doesn't happen. Is that typical or atypical?
So yeah, for your first question, the PD text was developed at a time where the plan was really, I think, to have more hotel, multifamily development out there. So I think the idea was to have everything. You're expecting probably larger buildings, larger developments to have more of a setback. That's my understanding. And the second part with the PD text revisions, to the best of my knowledge, I'm not sure if there's been other PD texts that the county has initiated changes to. I mean, it's not typical. The county may initiate changes to the zoning code or the subdivision ordinance, but there may be others in the room that are aware of another PD text that the county's initiated amendments to. I'm not aware of any in recent years.
And does changing this cause any problems with those that have gone before? I think you said that everything that has been asked for has been granted in beyond the setback. Is that correct?
That is correct. All of the requests have been granted. So, I mean, the folks that have come before, I mean, they had an application fee of $1,000 to come before the Islands Planning Commission, to do site plan approval. And I know some of them, said, gosh, why do we have to do this? Is there another way to do it? And so that's really where, we've had a lot of questions in the last couple of years of why this is required. So.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I just wanted to add 2 talking points. Pamela Thompson, Director of Community Development. Commissioner O'Quinn, to your question about ordinances, sometimes when making an ordinance compliant with a state or federal regulation, communities would put in that exact wording from the ordinance, such as the 15-foot from the line, which from time to time, the state and the federal government change their code. So then all of a sudden, the plan development text isn't in compliance with that code anymore. So when we're trying, what I always recommend to the attorney's office I'm working with is when you're wanting to just say, let's mirror the state or federal code when they have a requirement, is to say exactly that we're going to follow DNR's codes on setbacks as amended from time to time, so that you don't have to try to make sure you're keeping all those versions up to date. And you see 2 different types of requests that the commissioners have asked us about. So just the 2 big things that y'all have asked us to review is this PD text amendment and then the beach and dune ordinance. So you've seen both coming forward, and they're both cases where the county requirement is in the county requirement or the text, PD text is more than what the state requirement is. And so I know Commissioner Brunson and some of the others have asked us in a meeting to come back to you all and let you know, here's what the state requires, here's where the county differs from that, so that y'all can decide whether or not you just want to mirror the state requirements. So when you talk about your recollection of projects being before the planning commissions, you have both Beach and Dune and the Yacht Club, but amending the Yacht Club PD text would stop this application from coming forward.
Commissioners, do we have any other comments? This is not a voting item for today. Mere discussion. Is there any other question?
Are there other developments on St. Simon's Island that mirror this same problem that you're aware of? Or is it just these 7?
Not that I'm aware of, Commissioner, that we have any others that are specific to the Marsh setback. There are some other PD texts that do have some higher standards. Maybe it's tree preservation because they were put together before the county had a tree ordinance. And so there's some higher standards or architectural standards, things like that. But in terms of the Marsh setback, I'm not aware of any others that have a higher requirement for Marsh than the county does or DNR.
Is this going to require, require the owner of the property, developer or builder to have to do additional requirements and additional fees?
No. So if your purview is to initiate this amendment to the plan development text, then no, the county would initiate that, and there would be no fees for any of the property owners. The county would follow our process. This would go before the Islands Planning Commission for review, and then, of course, back to the BOC for their final decision on amending it. But there wouldn't be any fees to the property owners.
Would they have to go back before the Island Planning Commission again?
They would not. I mean, if your change is to to meet the county requirement, whether the 15 feet that we have now, then no, they would not. And to remove the language requiring site plan approval, then they would not need to go in front of the IPC. The only reason they would go before any other boards, if they were requesting a variance, they would go before the Board of Appeals. If they were looking to encroach into their side setback or something along those lines. But there wouldn't be any site plan with the IPC any longer.
Thank you. Mr. Willis, if you'd like to weigh in on this?
Sure.
We've had a few on Sea Island on the Marsh. There's a couple, some residential on the Marsh on Sea Island.
The beach and dune.
Not the beach, but it's
The Marsh.
the Marsh side that has the 40 foot instead of the 25. It's
Oh,
25
okay.
plus 15
Okay.
on
Yeah.
Sea Island.
Okay. So that is the the 40 feet would be the beach and dune setback.
Yeah, you don't have 40 feet on the marsh.
We did have that on some marsh lots on Sea Island that they wanted to add a pool that got into the 40-foot section. The 25 setback from DNR, but then there was additional county 15 feet. So we did have that. They had to come before us to get approval to do that.
I was thinking that was just the beach side, not the marsh side. I thought the marsh side's 40 feet too?
There was a 15-foot on, and I think we had one or two on the marsh side on Sea Island that we did approve.
If that is the case, can we look at those two, bring them forward, see?
Sure. Yeah. The only ones I'm thinking of, the additional 15 feet does come into play with the beach. I'm not familiar with the ones that may have been on the marsh, but I know on the beach. The new regulations from the DNR for the Shoreline Protection Act, the county is 15 feet more restrictive than DNR is. So those are the ones I'm most familiar with. But we can look into the issue with the marsh and see if there was anything on the marsh as well.
And I think at Sea Island, we've been making some exception that ours doesn't exceed what the DNR is. So on the beach side, I think maybe we need to explore whether or not we want to do that as well.
Right, exactly.
Just so that we don't cause the redundancy of the application process. Okay? Anything else? If not, we'll move on. Receive an update. Discussion regarding the proposed historic lot line ordinance amendment, and that'll be Ms. Thompson.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Pamela Thompson, Director of Community Development. As you're aware, there are several lots, several subdivisions, especially on St. Simon's Island, that were platted in the 20s, 30s, and 40s that are anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 square foot lots apiece. And when they were developed, people bought 2, 3, 5 lots and built one structure over all of those lots. The underlying original parcels are what we call the historic lot lines. What's been happening with the popularity and redevelopment of the island in the past several years is that once that home is sold, someone will come in and tear down that one home and then build one home per historic lot so that that one home is replaced by 2, 3, or 4 additional homes. The Board of Commissioners has discussed this topic several times, and back in 2015, the board at the time asked County Attorney Mumford to prepare a draft to actually merge those underlying lots in certain circumstances. And the reason for that was to maintain the integrity of those residential neighborhoods. You can see it as you drive through several neighborhoods where you basically had 1 or 2 story homes on what looked like a larger lot because it laid over 3 or 4 historic lots. and the neighborhood had a certain feel, a certain character, a certain density, and now currently you are allowed to build one primary residence per lot. So we are having an increase in the density in neighborhoods. The board did pass a substandard lot ordinance in 2016. So if these historic lots are smaller than 6,000 square foot, then they do have to build a scaled-down home to try to, in accordance with how non-conforming that lot is. And the substandard lot ordinance was passed by the board in an effort to maintain the residential character of neighborhoods. Fast forward to 2021, Commissioner Fendig had asked about it, and through our GIS department, looking on the island, not parcel by parcel, but in the main older lots where this occurs, which is East Beach, Glen Haven, neighborhoods like that, approximately 900 to 1,000 homes, new homes could be built where today it's just one house sitting over multiple lots. So Commissioner Fendig asked for you all to have that discussion. Attorney Mumford gave us the draft from 2016. Again, this is a draft for merging that. My predecessor, Mr. Hanley, had put some information in, approaching it almost like the substandard lots, where depending on how small it was and putting in the numbers of the size and width of the lot, that would limit or restrict the development on it. That may not be the approach that you all want to take. The purpose of today's discussion is to see if there's a board consensus for us to move forward with this discussion and to propose some agenda language to you. I would say, if you are interested in this, that it be as simple as, if your one home is over multiple lots, all the lots underneath that merge into one lot, so that you have one home with one lot. I like math in general. I don't like math in every one of my zoning ordinance paragraphs. So that's the presentation. Attorney Mumford can tell you more about the history when it was discussed 5 or 6 years ago, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. One of the things that we'll need to consider if the commission chooses to move forward is any applications that are in process, how we'll deal with that.
Yes, sir. And typically when we do that, it's the day you submit are the ordinances that you are required to follow. So anything in process before you consider an amendment would still be operating under today's codes.
Okay. And gentlemen, this is a discussion item. Are there any other questions?
Well, Ms. Thompson, I agree with you completely. I read this thing about 3 times, and it's just more than my feeble brain can absorb. I think you had a good idea there. If the house is there, you can't build one house back, period. Council, I know you've got, would there be 10 lots? I mean, could you theoretically have something where you got an estate out there in the middle of 3,500-foot lots, where one house is built on 10 lots or something? This is just too complicated here. I don't know how anybody.
Commissioners, one good example of this is, and this is what prompted this to come up in 2015, is the Glen Haven Baptist Church. When that church was removed, that revealed 15, 16 substandard lots of record, which means that each one of those lots could be a buildable lot, resulting in 16 new homes on that. Now, the owner has since come in and re-subdivided and made larger lots in that, so there's only 10 lots now, as y'all know. But at the time, and again, this is what prompted both the reduced scale of the homes ordinance in Section 507, as well as the draft you have in front of you, which was a concern that that could end up in 16 new homes because the church is out there. But you could take that example, instead of a church, it could be a home over 4 or 5 lots, over 2 lots. And this is something that every so many years comes up. We looked at it and did something to a degree for East Beach. They had what we called kind of partial lots or half lots that had been bought and sold. And these are all lots created prior to 1966. Our zoning ordinance came into play in 1966. lots that were created, platted, that were accepted, are lots of record. That's what these are. So there's lots like this peppered throughout St. Simons mainly. I think King City has them. Glen Haven has them. East Beach has them. So we first looked at this probably in 2008, 2009, did a modified version of this. Didn't go as far as what this would do. In 2015, 2016, we looked at it again. It reached the Planning Commission levels, but it did not proceed beyond that. So this is what we looked at last. And again, it can change, be amended, but this is where we stopped in our last effort for this.
Pam, do we have a lot of applications for this type of thing right now teed up, or do you expect, if we have a consensus to move forward, to have a rush of people to come in that's been holding land?
So Commissioner Booker, I don't know that they've been holding land, but as development on St. Simons has become more popular and greenland open platted lots have been built on, there are a certain group of builders and homeowners that'll come in, and I will say anecdotally what typically happens is that original home was owned by someone, the mother and father who lived there for their whole married life, and then when it sells, either the kids live out of town or they live somewhere else, and they don't really want to keep that family home, so they put it on the market. Someone comes and buys it and does build those 4 homes underneath. It's very regular that we get those applications now. I do think that if the board decided that they wanted to work on this ordinance, there would potentially be an increase in that. And I would think Attorney Mumford would tell you that you might want to consider a moratorium on that type of application while you're discussing it to avoid that rush to beat any change y'all might make.
I see possible scenarios that can arise during this. For instance, you were saying multiple homes on, but what happens in a scenario like the guy builds a house, but then he has a detached garage with an apartment living, or even more, a guest home. They build a guest house on that same property. So you do have multiple homes still on that lot, but it's concentrated into a single-family residence. But you're saying that they're not subdividable.
Yes, sir. I think to answer your question, Commissioner Tossison, since 1966, the zoning code has said 1 primary home per zoning lot, and no building can cross property lines. So the situations that we have where buildings are crossing property lines are typically older than that. And since I started here in 2017, now I will say occasionally my predecessors in the Community Development Department from 66 to 2017 did allow structures to cross property lines, and you would have exactly what you talked about where the garage might be on lot 3 of the underline and the house is on lot 1 and 2 and that sort of thing. Since 2017, we require those underlying historic lot lines to be merged so that you are following today's code of 1 primary dwelling per 1 lot and that a structure cannot cross property lines. So we're avoiding creating the new problem. But yes, once you look at those underlying, if they're not all merged into one, I think you might have some situations where, and we have that also actually sometimes on the mainland where it's been the family owned all the lots near each other. And so family members would build by one another without necessarily regard to the actual deeded property lines. And we always try to work with families on that. I hope that answered your question.
This,
Yes, sir.
Pam, this is like on Palmetto Street, there was 1 house on the corner. They sold the property, tore the house down, and built 4 shotgun houses.
Yes, sir.
That's where we're at.
Yes, sir. And when Glen Haven sold their lot, the lot that the block they wanted to move to is still today 7 buildable home lots. And that was going to become one the new home of the church. They would have been required to consolidate that. They wound up not developing there. So that's an example of, they tore down that house that covered 7 lots.
Yeah, there were 7 lots there? I thought there were 6.
One is mostly that drainage area, so
Okay.
I wouldn't tell you that it's buildable, but
Commissioners, this has been a thorn in the side of the island. These are all happening on 1928 to 1942 subdivisions that created on St. Simons. During that time, St. Simons was not a residential destination. It was a guest destination, kind of summer cottages and houses. And then people began to reside on St. Simons. And as you know, developers will do what's allowed, and in several years, 20 years probably now, they've caught on to this system, and everywhere that they can clear title on a property, they've, with the right that they had, they've developed stacked in homes. And that goes from down Butler Avenue at the Sea Island Golf Course all the way up to East Beach, and back in the back of those neighborhoods, and the older neighborhoods, we don't have the density room anymore. And to continue to just jam buildings in, jam homes in, and jam homes in, it destroys the quality, it overburdens the infrastructure, it increases the traffic. And I think the residents of the island are pleading as loud and large as they can to end this process of shotgun building. And this is our opportunity to say to our public, to our residents, enough is enough. We want quality, not density, and this is opportunity. If we don't do it in this generation of our commission, then I think, that's pretty much it, and the rest of the island will just be continued to be built. You talk about 900 to 1,000 homes, that's not including the 5,000 you may have at the north end of the island on large acreage, So there's, for the south end of the island, for the quality of the island, for the density, this is an action that we definitely need to take, and now's the time.
Commissioner Findig, I think the majority of the board's in agreement that it's time to do something with this. I think to simplify the ordinance would be paramount, and then we need to also look for the unintended consequences and the exceptions that we need to bring forward with it. But I think the majority of us are in agreement that it's something to move forward with. So.
yes, sir. And would you like for the attorneys to prepare, is it a temporary moratorium for the May 20th agenda, just to give y'all time so that there's not a rush of applications?
Commissioners?
I think it's a good idea. Won't hurt.
Okay.
All right.
We will do that. And then to your point, Commissioner Tossison's point, you always try to think of those unintended consequences, and that is also why we do have the Board of Appeals is, if we do have those, we should be able to deal with them on an individual case-by-case basis.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
We'll move on to receive an update regarding the recreational vehicles and mobile home parks. And Ms. Thompson, you still have the floor.
Yes, sir. Thank you. As you all recall, and I brought this ordinance to the board late last year, that historically my predecessor had allowed a certain number of RVs to be hooked up within certain requirements in mobile home parks, and that wasn't technically allowed by the ordinance. And so I asked you all if you wanted to still allow that, and you did. So you asked me to work with the attorney's office and actually prepare a draft for your consideration. So what's in your packet today is the draft that actually takes all those requirements from that 2013 letter about the requirements for a recreational vehicle in a mobile home park, and would actually amend the ordinance so that those could be allowed. So I'm happy to answer any questions. This is what we had discussed to allow more flexibility in housing options for people who live in Glynn County, and just to make sure that they have housing options within different price ranges, and at the same time, we know that those homes are as safe as we're able to make them, or make any home. So if there aren't any questions, then this is what the board, which I believe that this is what the board directed and asked us to bring forward, then we can send it to the, I don't remember off the top of my head, let me pull it up, if it's to the zoning ordinance or if it's an amendment to the code of ordinances, but we can put this in the approval process and get it before you for your consideration and adoption.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Thompson. Commissioners, I think that as we have brought this forward, I think we've discussed the viability of allowing RVs in mobile home parks to keep them from being off of parked on driveways and other areas that people are actually living in them in these places. So I think we've reached a good middle of the road, but this is certainly open for discussion today.
Mr. Chairman, it says each recreational vehicle shall be allowed to stay in a mobile home park for 6 continuous months at a time. Owner of the mobile home park and the owner of the recreational vehicle shall pay the lodging tax according to the ordinance for the first month of the residency, which is the same thing you do if you're in an RV park. I didn't know we put a 6-month time limit on it. Because there's some on the island, and I'm just saying because of the island, that are there year-round. So that's my only question.
Yes, sir. And Assistant County Attorney Jason Wilbanks, who drafted this, is in the back of the room avoiding my eyes. So I'm going to ask him if he'd like to come up and address where the 6-month came from. He can't avoid my voice.
Commissioners, Jason Wilbanks with the County Attorney's Office. So as Ms. Thompson stated, most of these requirements came from that 2013 letter that I think the commission is familiar with. And I tried to go back and kind of backtrace where some of these requirements came from. I believe that 6 continuous months language comes from a section of our ordinances 2-5-137 that deals with flood hazard requirements. And it specifically talks about RVs and places a limit on RVs in flood areas. So that won't apply to all places, but I think that's where this language was pulled from in that 2013 letter. And I'll add to the last few sentences about ready for highway use. Similar language was in that letter, and that's in the same flood hazard section of our ordinances. So I believe that's where that was pulled from. There's no magic to the 6 months that I'm aware of about RVs and mobile home parks on a state law level or anything like that. I believe that was just to keep, I guess, for safety purposes about these flood zone related ordinances that we've got. So the commission, I think we can change that if we need to, or if that's the desire. And keeping in mind whatever flood, I'm unfamiliar with how many of these RV mobile home parks would be in such a flood zone. And so I'm not even sure if that would apply, but again, I believe that's why it was included in the original letter.
I think my issue with it is if that's the best somebody can do and live in it, we shouldn't make them move in 6 months.
Yes, sir.
I mean, that not everybody can have a brick and mortar house, so.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I thought in October we had determined that existing RVs could stay in parks, but we weren't going to issue licenses for new RVs to move in. Is that correct? And this is different. Is that correct?
The direction you all gave me in October is correct, that we weren't affecting anything that was already located inside a mobile home park, but that we were codifying, in a sense, that 2013 letter to make sure that either RVs could be replaced or that other people that wanted to have an RV in a mobile home park could. So I believe that this ordinance is accomplishing that. Does that answer your question?
Well, we're limiting them to 25%. and then you're going to put a 6-month time. The 6 months is the only thing I've got heartburn with, because really and truly, the highway use, you should be able to move it. I mean, nobody takes wheels off of them, so.
Yes, sir, and I would never ask you all to approve an ordinance that we can't implement or enforce. I can tell you that we are complaint-driven and that we have the right, if we so choose, if I got a complaint about Mobile Home Park ABC, I could call them up and ask them for inspection of their records within a reasonable time. And what I would do is say, is the vehicle or the trailer in Lot 1, do your records show it being in Lot 1 for more than 6 months, or does it show it being in Lot 2? I think the point of that, to Mr. Wilbank's point about the flood ordinance and our compliance with the community rating system, is that if we received notice that a hurricane was coming that was likely to result in flooding and issued a mandatory evacuation order, that we would do our best to actually have all of those RVs, because they can physically move, to be removed out of harm's way.
And I'll add something if I can. The flood, so I think, as I said, the 6 months comes from the flood hazard ordinance. The requirements for RVs in that ordinance, it is an or and not an and there, which means that you have to do one of 3 things to have an RV in one of these areas. And one of those things, I think, Commissioner Rafalski, as you're saying, is to have it highway ready. Another one is the 6 months. So I don't know if the intention of the letter at the time was just to make sure that everything was fine and that we were well within that ordinance, but I think either or is fine. So we can change the 6 months and still comply with the flood hazard portion, as long as we keep the highway ready portion in there.
You know, we talk about the flood hazard. If you go look in most mobile home parks now, and I'm going to use the island, for instance, because I rode through there the other day, there's mobile homes in there that were probably put in there in 1958, and they're almost sitting on the ground. So, I mean, you know, this is going to, if you bring a new one in, you've got to come up to standards. I just don't want to see, and it's not that I'm for the RVs. I just hate to see somebody that's the best they can do and that's what they're living in have to move in 6 months. That's my point.
So they're not required to be secured to the ground in any way?
No, sir, they're not.
Well, you know, that's the point of it. They can move them. If there's a storm coming, they can hook up to them and pull them away and pull them into a safer area.
Yes, sir. And I think based on not only the conversations that we've been having since October, because like I told all the commissioners, the ones that were here in October, it was not staff's intent to not allow this. We just had to make sure the codes allowed it, because we are complaint driven, and at the time there wasn't a code that allowed this. So it sounds like Commissioner Rafalski's concern will be easily modified by having Mr. Wilbanks scratch the part about 6 months. And
You know, Pam, you see people that build decks on these things. And
people build
that's-
additions on them.
Yeah, well, that's a no-no. I mean, if you want to live in an RV in a mobile home park, that's fine. But to build a deck around 3/4 of it where you can't move it, no. I'm mainly just trying to, those people that's where they live.
Yes, sir.
Let's not penalize them for living in that.
And our intent, and I will tell you my intent as the person or the department that enforces these ordinances, is to make sure they are as safe as they can be, and that if we have a safety situation such as a hurricane, that they are able to get out and to protect life and property. So that will be how this will be enforced and reviewed. So I think that it sounds to me like the consensus is for the scratching out of the 6 month, so that it is highway ready, and that will still keep us in compliance with our flood hazard ordinance and our
Yeah.
community rating system.
I know we talked about the flood part of it.
Yes, sir. So if that sounds good to you all, then we can go ahead and move this forward and place it on a regular meeting for your consideration.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. People are living out of RVs now because of the COVID, because of the abandoning of cities, unable to buy homes. I mean, it's not like there are, a lot of homes available to buy. And they're living out of their RVs and moving because of work situations. So I think the commission is really wanting to accommodate that current need that's happening in our society.
I just think everything we need to do, we need to double check and make sure we're in compliance with the insurance, flood insurance ratings. That's a big, big deal.
Absolutely, and I'm sure you've seen emails from me that we can do certain things, but it would jeopardize our CRS rating, so we'll verify that and make sure we've verified that when we bring it back to you for formal consideration.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. Item number 6 is consider approving a transfer in the amount of $15 million from the general fund undesignated fund balance to the capital projects fund balance and discuss allocations of those funds. And Ms. Munson, you're up again.
All right. Okay, as you all are aware, we just finished our fiscal year 20 audit, and that was presented last Thursday night. We finished the fiscal year 20 year with a fund balance undesignated amount of around $27 million. We also have the $30 million designated rainy day fund. So one of the questions I've been asked is how we got to this amount. So I went back for several years, fiscal year 16, 17, and 18, we were at 39 million. So some of the rainy day funds fluctuated because we had some hurricanes in there, but basically 30 million in undesignated, 30 million in rainy day and 9 million in undesignated. So in fiscal year 19, we had a $16 million increase in our general fund year, and that came from 11 million more in revenue than was budgeted. Most of that came from FEMA reimbursements. So we don't typically budget those because it can take 2 to 5 years to get those back. We don't know when we're going to get them. So we got $8 million that year in FEMA reimbursements from Hurricane Matthew. We also collected 2 million more in taxes than we had budgeted. We had some extra investment income. So our revenues were 11 million higher than budgeted in fiscal year 19. And then our expenditures were 5 million less than we had budgeted in fiscal year 19. And that was due to a hiring freeze and a spending freeze that was placed about halfway through the year. So during fiscal year 19 is where we came up with the vast majority of the undesignated 27 million. And then it's been a couple of million a year. Last year, I believe we earned a couple of million in there. We also had the Coleman lawsuit that was paid out last year that was $7 million. So had we not had that lawsuit, we would have been better. We would have been more to the good in fiscal year 20, but with that lawsuit, we came in around 2 million. So that's what got us to the 27 million in undesignated fund balance at the end of fiscal year 20. So, and again, that is in addition to the $30 million rainy day fund. So, you know, we've been requested to start planning for some new capital projects in the next couple of fiscal years. And in order to have some money set aside for those, I would recommend that we transfer $15 million from the undesignated fund balance in the general fund into the capital projects fund to prepare for future projects.
Thank you, Ms. Munson. This will be a voting item today. Commissioners, any discussion on the amount that we're proposing to transfer? And any conversation that you'd like to have regarding that?
Mr. Chairman, before we vote on that, I think we need to have some discussion about what we're going to do with it and breaking it down. So
We certainly can do
for the
that
public,
first.
and I think before we vote on doing that, let's talk about how we're going to go about investing this money.
Yeah, I think that the 15 million that we're moving to capital funds projects, you know, I think we've kind of discussed kind of informally, but the way I see it is that probably 3 million of it we need to designate towards improvements to the courthouse, for safety upgrades, to juvenile court, to renovations at the office park building. And then I think additionally, we need to set aside about $7 million so that we can put $1 million per district towards capital projects that have been lingering, that didn't make the budget process this year, but that commissioners, because you know your districts the best, can kind of designate or direct those funds towards capital improvement and projects that need to be done that have been put on hold. That would probably put us for about 10 million total that we'll be looking at to spend in the next several months. Then the additional 5, I think we ought to probably just hold it right there and look a little bit closer what else needs to be done. But that would be my suggestion and recommendation to the commission is of the 15, we probably look at 10 of it being designated pretty quickly towards the improvements, and then improvements in each district as directed by the commissioners.
Okay, and any other commissioner?
Okay, Commissioner, I think that, that makes a lot of sense, what you said, and I think we need to include that in the motion of how we intend to break this down. It needs to be part of the motion that we vote on here today.
Once we do a motion, does then the money become encumbered? Is that correct?
So once the motion is made to transfer, it'll come out of general fund undesignated and go into capital projects, and it will be committed for future capital projects. As far as encumbering it, we won't do that until we actually have contracts out there. Now, what we can do is we can do a budget adjustment, which I can either put it in the fiscal year 22 budget and increase the expenditure budgets and capital projects fund for each commissioner's line item, or we can do those as projects come up. I would think for us it would be easier if we go ahead and designate that $1 million per district to put that in the bucket, and then we can start working through projects as they come into play.
And the $3 million for the courthouse.
Yes.
And just for clarification, we're talking each district, but being 7 commissioners, we know
Right.
there's not 7 districts. So the 2 at-large commissioners would be able to spread the $1 million worth of allocation throughout projects throughout the county as they would recommend. Does that make it clear to everyone? Did we state it properly? Okay, so with that, I'll entertain a motion unless other commissioners have anything to add to that.
I'd just like to comment on this. SPLOST was voted down, and one of the most pushed narratives against SPLOST was that the county has collected all this money and sat on it. And those accusations were in the rainy day fund and about the undesignated fund. And, we talked about the hurricane impact on communities. And I know that I talked to a lot of the Gulf Coast communities that had a lot of hits last year. And the 27 million kind of goes out pretty fast in a major hurricane hit. Thank God we haven't had that. We've had some close brushes. I know that I talked to the manager of Bay County, which is Panama City Beach, and the lack of FEMA reimbursement and their funds, they had actually 27 million set aside, went out in 2 weeks. And they couldn't get the FEMA. The damage was so intensive that they had to go to Wall Street and borrow $1 billion to repair their community. And so the 30 million is a good number to keep.
At least.
But then you had the 27 million, which was a narrative about that. And a lot of the public said, and I went on the radio a lot, I know some of you asked, we all were having those public discussions about SPLOST and funds and unfinished projects. And people said, y'all need to quit sitting on that money So we would ask them, well, how much money do you think you ought to have? I mean, common sense is you got to have 2 or 3 months in reserve if something happens in anybody's personal account or business, or certainly for the county. But I think the message is there are a lot of projects that the commissioners wanted to see done before SPLOST, a part of SPLOST, and so we're telling the public your narrative has weighed in and been found by this commission to be a force of action, and that's why we're making the move, is to invest that back into the community. Thank you.
And I think when you look at the 15 million, that leaves a little over 12 or 12.4, which is historically we've been bumping between that 12 and 15 million dollar range in undesignated fund balance, and I think that's served us well as a community. As Commissioner Fendig said, it's what you would do if you were prudent in your own personal life, you know, having some extra funds just to get you through. I would say this: we keep referring to the 30 million as the rainy day fund. I really think it's more of an emergency fund.
I agree.
Sometimes the connotation is, oh well, you know, it's a rainy day, we'll go to the movies. No, this is something bad's happened, and we need the money quickly. So I don't know how we do that, but I would probably encourage us as a commission and a government to maybe designate that a little differently.
So the official name is a revenue stabilization fund. That's what we call it in our audit, rather than a rainy day fund. But it is for hurricanes and natural disasters that come. And truthfully, you know, I've had discussions with several commissioners, with county managers, and I have the same concern that Commissioner Fendig brought up. If we do have a direct hit here, 30 million isn't going to even touch it. It might get us through a week or two. So, you know, I know that there's pros and cons to having that money sitting there, but when it comes down to it, if there is a direct hit and people can't get out of their neighborhoods and there's no power in this area and we have all kinds of issues, they're going to, you know, want that money sitting there for us to try to get back up and running. So just my 2 cents on the rainy day fund or the revenue stabilization.
Let me change this uplifting conversation here. Maybe it's instead of the coming down water, it's the rising up water fund. But, you know, at the end of the day, this $15 million is not making 5%. If it keeps going, I think the bank's going to probably charge us to store the money for them. You know, push come to shove, just like they did in Bay County, we borrow the money. Right. And the county can borrow the money on its revenue bonds or whatever, if God forbid. So I think it's prudent, it makes sense to go ahead and invest the money, and let's get on with it.
And I would add what Commissioner Fendig was alluding to a while ago about the 12.4 million that we're going to leave in the undesignated fund. That is for the county to operate in the event of a catastrophic shutdown where there's no revenue coming in. It gives us the operating funds to keep government moving. So prudent to leave a substantial amount of money in there. And I just wanted to make sure that went, the public understands why we're maintaining that amount.
Commissioner Fendig, if you can make that motion, I'll second it.
Right, I think you were looking at Commissioner O'Quinn.
O'Quinn, whatever your name is down there on the wing out there, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we transfer the amount of $15 million from the general fund and designated fund balance to the capital projects fund balance, with allocation to include $3 million for courthouse renovation and upgrade and safety improvements, as well as $7 million for capital project improvements as directed by the commissioners per their district.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second, and as a clarification, the courthouse improvements are for all of our courts, right? Not just the...
Yes, sir, that's correct. It is for the Superior Court as well as juvenile court.
And Commissioner Brunson, you're good with that in your second? Okay. Yes. All right. So we have a motion and a second. being no other discussion, all in favor, please raise your right hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you. We do have executive session today for personnel and property. So I need a motion to go into executive session. We got a motion
Second.
and a second. All in favor, please raise your right hand. That is unanimous. So we stand in recess. Have a motion, second? Motion and a second. All in favor, please raise your right hand. That is unanimous.
Mr. Chairman, I motion to approve the executive session minutes from March 4th, 2021, April 20th, 2021, and April 29th, 2021.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve minutes from 3 meetings. All in favor, please raise your right hand. That is unanimous.
Mr. Chairman, I will move to add an item to the agenda to approve and ratify the purchase and sale agreement with Holly Holdings Investment, LLC.
Have a motion and a second to approve
And ratify the purchase and sale agreement with Holly Holdings Investment, LLC.
Okay, so, any discussion? All in favor, please raise your right hand. That is unanimous.
And it is with great pleasure that I make a motion that the Board of Commissioners approve and ratify the purchase and sale agreement as amended between Glynn County and Holly Holdings, LLC for Glynn County's purchase and acquisition of approximately .88 acres of property located at 203, 211, 215, 217, and 221 Atlantic Drive, and 200, 204, 208, 2112, and 216 Palmetto Street on St. Simon's Island at a purchase price of $950,000 and authorize the chairman to execute all necessary closing documents.
We have a motion and a second for the purchase of the lots. This is contained in the Glen Haven subdivision. Any other discussion? Then all in favor of the motion as read, please raise your right hand. That is unanimous.
I just want to thank all of my fellow commissioners that worked very hard and the community itself that stepped up to make this possible. Thank you.
All right, is there any other business to come before us today? Seeing none, hearing none, this meeting stands adjourned.